everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to be here at the Gloucester stage. Thank you so much, Chris and Melanie and everyone here. We have a wonderful show for you tonight. It's Family Secrets. Family secrets. Some people were a little afraid to tell their family secret, but not me. I'm telling a family secret tonight. I am telling a story. But we have a great lineup, 7 really great storytellers, some special guests, and I wanted to let you know, too, we're streaming live on Facebook, and let's get started. So our first storyteller is a fan, has been at so many. I think she was at the very first one, way back when. I think it was 2013 was the very first one. Please welcome Elizabeth Enfield.
Well, I got to do this when I heard the topic because I always wanted to tell this story about my grandmother. And I said to Maureen, I have a family secret. And my grandmother was a virgin. And that's the title of my story. So I found a black and white photograph of Harry and Rose. Harry and Rose, and I had it blown up, if you can see. And they're standing in the Catskills during the summer on vacation. And that's my virgin grandmother. So how did this happen? How do I know this? And how am I going to make it so that you understand and think it's true and funny? My grandfather was from Poland, and he came over in the early 20th century from Poland. And I don't know if the boat stopped here, but my father said he was born in Brockton, his son, my father. And then they moved to Lawrence, where my grandfather worked in a shoe factory, and he always worked in shoe factories. I don't think he worked at the one in Beverly, but I remember when I was a little girl, I had patent leathers, and I came to their house one day, and he would always bend over and test my shoes to see if they were good shoes. Oh, yes, they're okay, he would say in a Yiddish accent. And then they were in Lawrence for 3 years, and then he went and bought a candy store down in Lower Manhattan. So they moved to New York City in the Bronx. And the way my parents met was that, let's pretend that back here is the Bronx Zoo, and over here is Southern Boulevard, which had trolley tracks and trains. And over here, you walked to the corner and you went to 180th and Honeywell Avenue, and that was my grandfather on my mother's side. And he had 7 children, my mother, her sister, and 5 brothers. So the way my parents met was that my father used to hang out at her house and hang out with the guys and pitch pennies and do all this stuff. And I really hung out a lot at my grandparents'. He was an Orthodox Jew, but it was a lot of fun over there. Imagine having 5 uncles and an aunt and 15 cousins and everybody coming there for Passover. And then he'd give us money to go to the penny candy place and buy candy. And then we'd go over to my father's place, and they weren't very religious. He was like a socialist, communist, and that kind of guy. And didn't really, I don't think he believed in God, and kind of that's the way my father was too. And the house was kind of really neat. I mean, my grandfather, my mother's side, had this private house. It was one of the only private houses amongst all these apartment buildings. There was a block from Whitkin's Deli, one of the best delis in the United States. And it was white stucco, green painted, and there were always people coming and going up the stoops and playing out in the street and everything. And then my father's house, which was a few blocks away, you went to the other side, which is over here on Southern Boulevard, was a little apartment and was very clean. My grandmother had this stuffed couch made out of like a light blue brocade fabric, and on the little coffee table in front of it, there was this dish, cut glass, with what she thought was the favorite candies. They were stuffed fruit things with sticky centers, and I hated them. And I couldn't even sit on the couch because she had plastic on it. You know that see-through plastic? They covered it. So I'd sit there, and then we'd go down, and then I'd get up, and the thing would start rising. And she said, why don't you eat the candy, in her Yiddish accent? And I said, well, I don't like that. Where's my Hershey bar? So my grandfather always had Hershey bars. And if we didn't meet them in the house, he would be sitting out on the park bench in front of the zoo, and he'd always have a balloon for me, and then I'd go into the zoo. So then my grandmother, her name was Rose, and she had 3 children. My father was the oldest, then there was Larry, and then there was the sister who unfortunately passed away. And she died before I was born, and that's another story. So sometimes, you know, like I got a cat, and my mother would go, if I was going to name the cat, and I probably named it Kiki or Khrushchev. It was the time Khrushchev was the prime minister of Russia or something. And I always had two cats, a male and a female. And she says, she'd hear it meowing, and she'd go, name it Rose. And I say, why Rose? Well, you know Grandma Rose. She's always fetching. She's always whining. Well, name the cat Rose. I didn't think that was very nice. You know, I love my grandmother. She was a little bit stiff-stayed. I mean, here she's wearing her Bermuda shorts and has her little golf cap on, but she was nice. And then she cooked kind of like, not like my grandmother on the other side. We always had like chicken noodle soup, and it would have a matzo ball in it and unborn chicken eggs. When she went to the kosher butcher, she would pick her chicken, and some of them still had unborn eggs, they called them, inside of them. And they'd pluck it for her, and she'd bring it home, and she'd cook it. But my father, who was going to be an artist, and then my mother married him. My grandmother didn't really think she should marry him because he wasn't going to have enough money as an artist to support everybody. And so he heard that, and he was really mad. And he said, well, I'm not going to eat her chicken soup anymore. It tastes like dishwater. And she wouldn't take the fat out, and he thought it was horrible. But his mother, on the other side, she'd make gefilte fish, and she would make, you know, like borscht, which I now like, but at that time I didn't like what she made over there. So then I keep hearing stories, you know, like they would talk behind her back, and I didn't understand what was happening. And they said, well, she was, you know, she wasn't really my grandpa's wife. And I said, well, what happened? And years later, my mother told me the truth. Evidently, before I was born, he was married to his first wife, and then she passed away, and so he married again. So I only knew Rose as my grandmother. So I thought she was the mother of Phil and Larry, his brother, and Betty, who's the daughter. And then I found out that she wasn't. So I said, well, did they have any children? She said, no. In fact, my mother said, he never slept with her. I said, really? She's a virgin? And I had met her once, and she had either 4 or 2 other sisters, and they were all spinsters. So my grandfather married her when he was 55. She was 55. And I don't know how I heard this, but I kind of had this image of him chasing her around the bed or something, and nothing. So that's how my grandmother was a virgin.
If you get a chance to talk to Elizabeth after the show, you might want to ask her about Woodstock. Woodstock, Elizabeth.
I'd like to ask
Ask her. Our next storyteller has a show on 1623 Studios called Appreciative Recovery. She works for the Open Door. Please welcome Kelly Knox.
Let's see, how's that? I talk very softly, so hopefully you can hear me. No. Is that better? Yeah. All right. Belt it out. So my story is a tad bit more serious than that. And and I get nervous, so I've got my little notes here. So in 2017, scientists discovered that changes in our DNA caused by environmental influences stay in our genomes for up to 14 generations, meaning your DNA has remnants of your ancestors way back to 1039 AD. Woo! So what that also means is your family secrets and the shame that caused them are compounded year after year, going back 980 years. That's a lot of years. I'm just grateful that Ancestry.com doesn't go back that far. My addiction would be pushed over the edge. So my maternal grandparents immigrated from Hungary in the early 1900s, and they settled in Pennsylvania. And my grandfather got a job as a miner, and they got into a routine. Well, first they had 7 children. Right? That was probably quite the routine. Unlike her grandmother. Yeah. So 7 boys, and one of the routines that I just learned about a couple years ago is my grandfather would go to work in the morning, leave the mine, go to the bar, and find his way home somehow at night, and be pretty sauced by the time he got there. And so this is around 1918, 1919, and Prohibition was, just around the corner. And just like any good alcoholic, he and his buddies devised a way to continue being able to drink should this happen. And they became bootleggers, which was actually quite dangerous to be a bootlegger back in the day, especially on your own, because you have Al Capone as your competition. So in about 1921, 22, he was standing on the platform at Penn Station, and he was trying to get some moonshine across state lines, and somebody was a little upset about it, and gunfire started, and he was actually killed trying to bootleg some moonshine, which left my great-grandmother and 7 boys. So go forward to my generation when I was a child. I don't think I've ever seen any of my great-uncles sober, and I've spent a lot of time with them as a child. So there's that. Now on my paternal side, my paternal grandfather, who was proudly served in World War II, he had a brother whose name was John, and as I learned during one of my marathon ancestry sessions, John was committed to a psychiatric hospital, and while there, he died by suicide. So addiction and mental illness are pretty much woven into the DNA of my family. So throughout most of the 1900s, mental illness and addiction were linguistically challenged. Shame, legitimate fear of losing one's livelihood, and lack of knowledge kept addiction and mental illness and proper language at bay. But around the 80s and the 90s, as many of you might know, advocates started pushing it more into the mainstream, and language became more available. Actually, today it's so available that there's politically correct language for mental illness and addiction. It's not committed suicide, it's died by suicide, it's not mental hospitals, it's psychiatric hospitals, and it's not addicts and alcoholics, it's people living with substance abuse disorder. Language actually helped change the whole landscape. I mean, think about it. Language, stories, poetry, it helps you find a place to heal. And of course, my immediate family didn't escape this ancestral DNA. My parents both drank when I was young. My mom and my maternal grandmother both had anxiety. Sometimes it was crippling. And my dad, lay diagnosed by myself and my siblings, lived with and continues to live with bipolar disorder. And therefore, me, my mom, and my siblings also lived with bipolar disorder. Luckily, my siblings and some of my extended family have found a pathway, our individual pathways to healing and wholeness, and some of my family hasn't. We've lost some members to these diseases, and some are living and still suffering. what I'm going to do now is leave you with a poem about my experience of growing up under the influence of someone with bipolar disorder. So the poem is titled Bipolar 2. The party balloon drinks in helium. Its swollen energy lifts towards the sky, as if slipping from a child's hand. To the stars it flies. I can be an astronaut or the leader of a ring. I can be the one who taught all the world's kings. I can be a singer. Lady Gaga, I'll upend. I will not linger until I am president. The balloon almost reaches Neptune's 14 moons, but it never gets there. It falls all too soon, slowly dropping from its trip to outer space. Air slowly escaping. There is no saving grace. Worn and shapeless, on the ground it sits, waiting for someone to come fix it. No one arrives, and there, forever it lies. Repeat. The party balloon drinks in helium. Its swollen energy lifts towards the sky. As if slipping from a child's hand, it flies. I can be an astronaut. I can be a leader of a ring. I can be the one who taught all the world's kings. I can be a singer. Lady Gaga, I'll upend. I will not linger until I am president. The balloon almost reaches Neptune's 14 moons, but it never gets there. It drops all too soon, slowly dropping from its trip to outer space. Air escaping. There is no saving grace. Worn and shapeless, on the ground it sits, waiting for someone to come fix it. No one arrives, and there, forever it lies. Repeat.
Thank you, Kelly, so much for sharing that with us. I am your next storyteller. I'm 22. I'm getting ready to leave on a trip to go study abroad in Ireland, in Dublin, Ireland, at Trinity College. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to Trinity College, right? Storied place, cobblestones. It's a dream. And I swear I didn't go over there just because U2 was going on tour. No, that's not really. No, I was serious. I have an Irish grandmother who came over in 1904 on the White Star Line. I was obsessed with her when I was younger. Sitting around the table with my aunts and my mother, I would hear stories of her incredible strength. You know, how she walked a mile to go get food and then walked another mile back. I wanted to be like her. My values, who I think I am, who I know to be, I credit her. Anyway, so I'm getting ready to go on my trip, and I'm also preparing a trip for my mother. We're going back to the homeland. We're going back to the homestead. I'm taking her there with my brother. And part of the trip was also connecting with my heritage and my grandmother. Because she was a legal alien in the United States, she never gave up her Irish citizenship. She wasn't an American citizen. I could become an Irish citizen. there was a list of documents that I needed. My mother's birth certificate, check. My mother's marriage certificate, check. I had that. My grandmother's birth certificate. We were heading to Rathvilly, County Carlow, to go get it when we were there. My grandmother's marriage certificate. I didn't have that, but I did have her death certificate. So it was my job, the only thing in my control, was getting her marriage certificate. I had never heard about the marriage, didn't know anything about it, so I asked my mother, Mom, do you know anything about your mother's marriage, the wedding day? Like, what was it like? Did she tell you anything about it? No, she never talked about it. You don't know anything about your mother getting married? No. Oh, okay. I call my aunt, Mo. What was it like? You know, did your mother ever talk about getting married? No. She never said anything about, you know, the wedding day and what it was like, and no, she never talked about it. I'm like, what's going on here? I was really starting to get curious. So I went into Boston. The Department of Records was on Tremont Street, and I knew the area well because I worked at Jordan Marsh when I was younger. Everybody remembers Jordan Marsh, right? Best blueberry muffins ever. So I took the train into town, and I went downstairs into the records area, and I was searching for Catherine Bridget Byrne and Frances Shipley Smith. Going through the microfiche, Catherine Bridget Byrne and Frances Shipley Smith. Just kept going and going and going. And, you know, I had a kind of a good idea of when they might have been married because my mother's one of 9 children, and I had the date of her brother's birthday. So I moved back a couple of years, and I found it. There it was. You know that like serious rush of adrenaline that you get when you find something you've been looking for? And there it is, right on this little microfiche player. And I can see her signature, and I can see my grandfather's signature, and I'm really drawn to this. I can't even believe it that I found it. And I look at the date, December 21st, 1913. I'm thinking, December 21st, what a really nice time to be married. It's right before Christmas. Must have been a lovely holiday they had. You know, I'm dreaming a little bit, and then I read a little bit more, and they got married at Boston City Hall by a justice of the peace. So I'm thinking, hold on a minute. December 21st, 1913, and I look at my list of all the children's birthdays, and Walter was born July 14th, 1914. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh my God, she was pregnant. She was pregnant. This explains everything. It explains all the no's, why she never talked about it, and it also explains this other story I remember hearing about her brother Tom, who she came over to keep company. There was a big falling out, and that was the end of the relationship. My mother never knew her cousins. So I'm putting 2 and 2 together, and I'm so excited that I found out this information that I gather up my papers, I shove them in the bag, I run up the stairs, I cross the Tremont Street to Park Street Station, and there used to be this bank of payphones at Park Street Station. Tell me you all remember this bank of payphones. And I put in all the change, I get on the phone, and I'm really excited, and I remember being nervous, and it was like beautiful blue sky that day. And I call up, my mother picks up, Mom, you'll never guess, I found it. Catherine Bridget Byrne, Frances Shipley Smith, they were born on they were married December 21st, 1913, right? And Walter was born on July 14th, 1914. Mom, I figured it all out. She was pregnant when she got married. Mom, all of a sudden, I feel this blob on the top of my head. A bird pooped on my head. And I say, Mom, you'll never guess. A bird just pooped on my head. And I hear, that would be your grandmother telling you to leave well enough alone. Click. She hung up on me. My mother hung up on me for the first time in my life. I put the phone down. I put my hand on top of my head to hold the goop that started to like drip down my hair. I get my bag, I turn around, I go to the crosswalk at Tremont Street, and isn't there always a cop at Tremont Street, like stopping the cars and letting them go? And I'm desperately looking at the cop to let me cross the street. He lets me go. I run across Tremont Street, and I run all the way back down Winter Street to the Jordan Marsh Ladies' Room. That's my story. Thank you very much. Sometimes we need to leave well enough alone. The next storyteller is a good friend, and I'm pleased to have him back on the Fishtail stage, Brian Orr.
Good evening. Boy, when you're up here, you can't see a thing. So my story is about my family growing up and our secret from our vacationing while camping at Nickerson State Park. So my mother was a second grade teacher. My father was a fifth grade teacher. And we had 6 kids in the family, and we were students. We did go to school while growing up. And so that meant at the end of the school year, that meant that we were free. We as students, my parents as teachers, and it was time to go on vacation. So our favorite vacation was going camping at Nickerson State Park. So we would load up the car. Now this meant that we had a large car, a Plymouth Fury 3, if you remember those, a huge car, station wagon, that was 3 banks of seats. So that fit 3 in the front, 3 in the middle, and 3 in the back. I hope you did your math, because there's my mother and father and 6 kids, but I didn't tell you about my grandfather. So my grandfather lived with us, and we couldn't leave him behind because he was old and needed help. And he was going to come with us to Cape Cod, and he was going to get into a hotel and not camp with us. Gramps, we often called him Grumps, behind his back, and sometimes that was really close behind his back because he couldn't hear very well. So he insisted on coming. So we loaded up the car, and our car, the Fury 3, obviously fitting 9 people, couldn't, I forgot the dogs too, 2 dogs. So we had, my father made this big rack. It was before the Thule things, and so he made this box that was hung on the car and sat on the car and tied down and everything. And it was, the Fury 3's probably got about 18 miles per gallon to begin with. And this rack, this box of wood, was not aerodynamic. And so we probably moved down to about 13 miles per gallon. So besides the passengers inside, and 9 of us probably needing pit stops, we also needed pit stops to just fill the car. So it took us a while to get up there. We had to take many rest stops, and you're probably thinking that the story would be about us leaving one of our children at the rest stop, but it is not that. That's an old story. Many people have that story, and we never left a child at a rest stop. We did leave a baby at a supermarket once, but that's a whole nother story. So we get up to Cape Cod, and we get across the bridges, and we find a hotel for my grandfather, and he was an old curmudgeon of a man from Ireland. It is St. Paddy's Day weekend, so we have to bring up the Ireland part. And so we brought him up to the front desk of the hotel, and he said, found out the price and says, I'm not staying at that. They're ripping us off. That's bloody murder. I'm not going to stay in that hotel and pay those prices. I'm going to go camping with you. So my mother reneges and said, okay, come camping with us. So we have to go and get another cot and sleeping bag someplace, and so we arrived at Nickerson State Park at the time that my parents really like to arrive at this time for setting up camp, usually at night and in the rain, and so we broke camp, and we had this big tent. Okay, big tent. It was one of those Sears tents. It was 3 rooms. It was a six person tent, perfect for 9 people. And so we set it up, and by the time we're done setting up, in the rain, flashlights, car lights, setting everything up, it's almost time for bed. So this year we also had a new innovation for camping. At the time it was a portable toilet. And you can probably anticipate what's going to come, and you are right. So it's a portable toilet, and it was a toilet seat with on a little stand, and it had a baggy type of thing, blue, of course, and that was hung below the seat by a giant rubber band. So that way people didn't have to unzip the tent and zip it down again, going out to the bathroom through the night. Everybody could just take care of themselves there. So the night passes. Everybody sleeps pretty well, as far as I knew. And as is true with camping, the next morning it's sunny. Birds are chirping. You're waking up a little bit earlier than you normally would because it's brighter and birds are chirping. And so some of us are just halfway awake, and we hear this sound that's not quite like a bird chirping. It was more like a, And so some of us, one eye open, we said, what is that? And then we hear, and then, kapoosh. And I go, oh no. So I told you that was coming. You didn't have to, and you weren't there to clean it up. So it's, and I'm a pediatrician. I talk about pee and poop every day, so it's not a big deal for me. And to top it off, that is not the family secret, because for sure the 6 kids, when we got back to our friends in our neighborhood, said, guess what? We went camping and our toilet exploded. So it was not a secret. So the big problem with this accident is that my grandfather's Irish cap happened to be floating down this river of pee. So those of us who woke up and saw this situation, we went into red alert, and my mother and I think my younger brother and I, we grabbed towels, mopped things up, grabbed the cap, and my mom says, let's go to the laundromat before everybody else gets up. For some reason, my mother always knew wherever we went vacationing where a laundromat was and where a hospital was. I magically knew that. So we went to the laundromat. We rushed there, and we did the laundry, cleaned things up, cleaned his cap, and when we went to got donuts, because that was the ruse that we went out for donuts. So we come back, and people are up at the campsite, and they're my father's making breakfast, wondering where we went with the car. So we come back, and we get out of the car with donuts, and my grandmother says, Mary Ellen, I can't find my cap. Right away, first thing out of his mouth. And so I went to the car and said, Gramps, it's right here. You left it in the car. I said, I didn't leave it in the car. Yeah, it's right here. It's right here. And he takes the cap and he inspects it and says, yeah, this is my cap. He smells it. It says, it smells really good. And he puts it on. It's fitting good too. I don't know why that is. I said, Gramps, it's the camping air. It's Nickerson State Park. This is the beauty of camping. Your cap smells better, it fits better, everything's wonderful. And he bought it, and he was very happy at breakfast with the cap on. To the day he died, he never knew that his cap was floating down a river of pee. And that was our family secret.
Thanks, Brian. You know, there's always some themes, you know, some undercurrent themes that happen at shows sometimes. It's quite funny. We have the next two storytellers are special guests. They're up from JP. They have performed for Mass Mouth, and we're really pleased that they were able to come up from JP for this show. The first storyteller from this team is Mary Wallace. Mary, come on up and tell your story.
So there I was on vacation on the most beautiful beach you can imagine. In that magical moment of vacation when you've been there long enough that you've relaxed and you still have long to go, so you're not even thinking about returning. And I had set myself up for the entire day, and I'm there at the beach sitting quietly while the waves roll in. I'm by myself. I begin breathing with the wave. Mom? That's right, I'm not alone. I'm on vacation with my family. That's my 10-year-old sitting next to me. Totally forgot about him. He's digging in the sand. Mom? Yeah. Is it true that some women like to lick and suck penises? And have you ever done that with Dad? Oh my God. You know, like you hear about time slowing down. I have seconds to answer him, right? And I've got to really be kind and generous with this answer. And I'm flashing back. I mean, everything is flashing back. I'm trying to find the right answer. And in his words, I hear three things. I hear curiosity, disgust, and hope. And you have to understand, this kid is 10 years old, and I have kept him out of public school in Boston. I have homeschooled him so that I can keep his innocence as long as possible. And just 3 months earlier, the same kid, I had to give him the saddest news ever and broke his heart. Well, I should tell you, before I did that, he had asked me, "What is it like to be in love, Mom? What does it feel like to be in love?" And I said, "Well, honey, it's like Christmas morning. You can't wait to wake up and open that package. You're so excited. Life's got so many options." I shouldn't have said that the same year that he figured out that Santa Claus didn't exist. He was heartbroken when I told him, in fact, that it was me. I wanted to be honest with him finally. I mean, he was 10. So here I am, 3 months later, and I've got to give him some really good information here to not ruin the rest of his life. So I thought, I gotta tell him about love. It's all about love, right? So very quickly, I think I came up with the best answer, and I said, "Well, honey, when you really, really love someone, there's many things you do to make them feel good. And that's one. And yes, I have." "Okay, Mom." Just kept digging in the sand. Never asked me another question about sex, ever. That was 15 years ago. So this kid is 25 now. And he's getting ready to move in with his girlfriend in his first apartment in September. And the other night I was having dinner with him, and I said, "So, honey, how's it going with the girlfriend?" He said, "Oh Mom, it's great. She really, really loves me.
Thanks, Mary. Surprise. Chuck Collins.
You just met my wife. So I'm sitting in a double-wide mobile home with 9 people who are at least twice as old as me, and some of them 3 times older than me. And I'm in agony. To give you the context, I'm about 26 years old, and I have this job, which is I work with mobile home park tenants who live in mobile home parks where they don't own their land. And when their parks come up for sale, I work with them to help them buy their parks and own them as cooperatives. So I'm in Bernardston, Massachusetts, sitting with the leaders of this 30-unit mobile home park. And the reason I'm in agony is because I am their consultant, and they have asked me to interview confidentially everyone who lives in the park and find out if they have enough resources, if they have enough money in the group to be able to purchase the park. And so they're sitting there looking at me, and I should tell you, at age 26, I actually look considerably younger. I look like a high school student. I'm thin, I'm awkward, I have terrible skin, and they're kind of looking at me like, our future depends on this kid. But they've entrusted me, and I've literally had confidential conversations with everyone there. I know what they have for savings, I know what their incomes are, I know what they could afford to pay toward the purchase of the park. And I'm in agony because I have to give them the report. I have to tell them the bad news that they don't really have the resources to buy this park. But the other reason I'm in agony is because I have a secret, which is I come from a wealthy family. In fact, at 26, but at the age of 25, I had inherited a substantial amount of money. All secret, no one there knew this. My great-grandfather was the meat packer, Oscar Mayer. And so my dad used to say, our family secret is bringing home the bacon means something different in our family. So I'm thinking, they have like a $35,000 gap. I could just write a check. I could pretend it came from somewhere else, and these folks could keep their homes. They may not have to lose their park. So I'm actually thinking I might do that. Anyway, I explained to the leaders of this park, the 9 leaders that are there, I said, you know, there's a group of people, mostly people in this room, who are retirees and have a little bit of a nest egg to fall back on. But there's maybe a third of the group that has like no money, and the other third that almost are like, they're underwater. They're not really, they don't have any financial capacity. It's a fairly low-income group. And you're about $35,000 short of where we need to be to have a down payment so that we could purchase this park. So the leaders all look a little bit sad for a moment. And then one of them, this guy Reggie, who's sort of jingling the change in his pocket, he says, I have enough to buy my share, and I have another $6,200 I could put toward the purchase of the park. Now, because I know everybody's private financial information that they don't know about each other, I happen to know that Reggie has just put every dollar he has on the table. And then the Dundorfs say, well, we have enough to buy our share, and we have $5,300 that we can put in. And I happen to know that's all their money. And around the room this group goes, and it comes to Harlan and Mary Perro. We're sitting in their double-wide mobile home. They said, we have enough to buy our share, and we would like to help purchase Mrs. Rivas' share on the condition that she doesn't know that in order to protect her privacy and her dignity. And they go around the room, and unbeknownst to each other, everybody in that room puts every dollar that they have on the table. and they have done it. They've closed the gap. They've raised the money among their group. And I have to say, it hadn't occurred to me that the people who had a little bit more could have put their more in. So they succeeded. They bought the park. At the day of the closing, all the 48 residents cram into this law office. The men have cigars. They're making jokes. Harlan tells the Greenfield Recorder newspaper, "We are like the Israelites who have been wandering in the desert. We just bought the land from Pharaoh. We are hostage no more." And they were jubilant. And Mary came up to me and said, "You're a smart young man. Someday you'll go to college." And I'm like, I've been to college. I've actually been to graduate school, you know. She said, "I don't know why you're hanging around. You could go work on Wall Street. You know, why are you hanging around with a bunch of old fogies like us?" I said, "I can't think of anywhere I'd rather be today." And she said, in a kind of a confidential maternal way, "Have you ever tried Noxema?" I'm like, So that was an amazing day for me because something happened that day. I was struck. I had grown up in a wealthy community where people were generous, charitable, but I'd never seen people be all in solidarity with each other. And in a really kind of spiritual way, I wanted what these people had. I wanted to live in a community where people were going to be all in for each other. And I began to reflect that the money that had kind of flowed to me was the barrier to my having really authentic relationships of reciprocity with people. I never had to ask people for anything. I could just pay for things. And that was a barrier to my own journey. So I decided at the age of 26 that I would move this money along, that I would give it away. So I wrote my parents a letter thanking them for this opportunity and for not having to have debt going to college. And my dad called me up immediately after he got this letter. He said, "Have you given away the money yet?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, I want to talk to you about this." And he actually came out from Michigan, where I grew up, spent a day with me in Boston. He said, "Listen, you grew up in a bubble. You don't necessarily understand what the value of this money is. Bad things can happen. Like, for instance, you're single now. But what if you have a partner and that partner is ill? Wouldn't you wish you had that money? Or what if you have a child someday and that child has a special need? You're going to wish you had that money." And I said, "Well, actually, I have thought about that. And if that were to happen, then I would be in the same boat as 99% of the people I know. I would have to get help. I have to build a community that I really believe that, your security is in the community. I would have to lean on my friends, congregation, etc." My dad said, "Yeah, but in the end, you probably would have to fall back on government. And that's a lousy and tattered safety net." To which I replied, "Well, then maybe I would have a stake in fighting to make that a better safety net." To which my father wisely replied, "Oi." So idealistic. He says, "Okay, I understand. I love you. No strings attached. You got to do what you got to do." So, a couple weeks go by. I went to the National Bank of Detroit. I signed the papers over to a couple of foundations, went back to my job working with mobile home park residents. I should say my dad, at the very end, he said, "All I really care about is that you be okay, that you're going to be okay." And I called him the day that I made that transfer. He said, "Are you going to be okay?" I said, "I think so." To be honest, I had no idea how much other advantage I had that was kind of hardwired into 4 generations of intergenerational wealth and security. So I went back to my job. A couple months go by, and then something bad happened, which is the house I was living in burned down. No one was hurt, but it's incredibly disorienting if you've ever had that happen. And I had a sleepless night on a neighbor's couch, and the next day I'm standing out there with my housemate Greg, and we're just kind of looking at this wreckage of our house, looking for pictures or anything. Up pull 4 cars. Out of those cars come about 10 residents of the Bernardston Mobile Home Park. They have casseroles, shovels, and trash bags. They've come to help us put our lives back together. And that was the moment I thought, I think I'm going to be okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chuck, for sharing that. Our last storyteller is someone you probably know if you've been to Common Crow. Kate Noonan, come on up.
Thanks, everyone. There's so much to say. I'm the youngest of 5. The age spans 17 years. 7 years between me and my sister, the closest. So I spent a lot of time alone. And my older brothers and sisters, they got to go off and do things together. And I'd go stay with my grandmother, stay with an aunt. I actually enjoyed that time a lot because I got some special attention as opposed to the regular beatings I was getting from my brothers and sisters. They would practice, the Three Stooges moves on me, or world wrestling, flying drop kicks, things like that. So anyway, getting back to the story, my parents are from the Great Generation, right? Both born in 1920. And boy, it blows my mind to think about what they experienced in their lives. So my dad made it to 85, my mother to 94. Horse and buggy in Harvard Square, Cambridge, to, getting on a cell phone and calling someone or emailing. It's just amazing, the things that they experienced and the change that they saw. So my mom, she was, I think, third generation American-born Irish. My dad, second, so I'm third, fourth. And we've got the McSorleys, the Noonans, the Flynns, the McCarthys, so we're Irish. They all came from Ireland. We didn't talk about Ireland. What we talked about, or heard about, were the stories that my parents experienced themselves here, because they were really American by then. So my dad, his father was a dentist. He was born in 1920. He went to St. Paul's. He sang in the choir in Harvard Square. Went to BC High, and then to the war. Or, BC High, BC, the war. Took the islands in Iwo Jima as an officer because he had graduated from college, and came back, had tied one on with his good friend, went to talk to the brothers over at BC about going to law school, and they said, why don't you head down the road to BU? And they both did, and they both got their law degrees. So there's my dad's, very rapid beginnings from, Prohibition, Depression, the war, all these experiences crammed into a very short time, 24, 25 years, something like that. So, Dad loved to tell stories about what it was like just getting to school. It's depression. His father's a dentist. He's probably doing a lot of free work. My grandmother's walking to that grocery store a mile to buy the groceries every day, just enough for dinner. And he's getting up and taking a rag, and he's got it nice and damp, and he's cleaning windshields on his way to the streetcar to earn fare, so he can get on the streetcar and go up to Chestnut Hill and go to BC. So, he loved to tell that story. He loved to talk about how they hoped that the biggest kid in the neighborhood would get the nice white coat so that everybody could borrow it. That was camaraderie. He loved that. He loved to talk about boot camp. He did not like to talk about the war. But, you know, he loved teamwork. He loved the community. He enjoyed his neighbors, his family. There was 6 of them. And so that was my dad. My mother, she grew up on School Street in Somerville. So, you know, they all started in Charlestown, the families, and then they came into Somerville, Cambridge, and then I grew up in Arlington. So she talked about, she didn't talk about being broke. She talked about how stylish her mother was, what a beautiful wardrobe she had, that she made hats, that her father was so much fun, and that he had a candy store and he sold real estate, and that he always had gas in the car, which was great because then the really cute boys would ask her out because Jake would give them the car. One of my mother's favorite one-liners, boys mean cars, cars mean trouble. I guess that's 2 lines, but you get the picture. When I was a kid and I was getting into the party scene and I saw my mother in action, I was like, oh my God, she is the original party animal. So anyway, our life is going on. I've gone off, done my high school, gone to college. I'm having like a tender moment with my mom. She's telling me stories, whatever. And I say to her, Mom, you know, I hear you tell stories about how you guys summered in Gloucester, like in the 20s. Who could afford a summer house? And your dad could always put gas in the car, but he was selling real estate during the Depression. Like, how does that fit together? I don't understand. And she said to me, oh, Kate, you're the youngest. You missed so many of the stories. I never told you. Your grandfather was a rum runner. And I know we've had some tough stories tonight about alcoholism, addiction, and how it impacts families. And I can't say that I missed out on all of that. But the stories were great. It connected my mother to Gloucester. They were over on River Road. Any Hopper fans in here? Really nice painting called The Bootleggers or The Rum Runner or something like that. That's the kind of boat he was running around in. And they would go out to the schooners, I think, pick up booze from Canada. And I don't know, because I don't know the whole story, because I never met that grandfather. Imagine he died quite young. I didn't even tell you this about my mother. So my mom, she managed to go to college. She went to Emmanuel. She wanted to be a school teacher. She married a soldier. The soldier went off to war. She found out she was pregnant. Knock came to the door. She's sitting there with her dad. He comes back upstairs and says, it's really too bad that belly is going to keep growing because you just lost your husband. He was shot down in the war, which is why there's the big age span in my family. And very shortly thereafter, her father died. And I forgot to mention that her mother died right after she graduated from college. So we're talking a really short period of time where she had all those losses. And I don't know if her cheerful demeanor, party attitude was her way of coping with that, but it worked. And she had so much fun. Her friends kept getting younger and younger. She was a very popular social member at the Bass Rocks Golf Club. And it was probably the greatest day ever for her when my brother Mark and a couple of his Harvard friends rented a place on Atlantic Road when everything was in rough shape and reconnected with Gloucester. So that brought my mother back up here. My brothers all bought a house. They all had their babies on the beach in the summers. And so I've lost my train here, but the secret was the rum running. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And thanks to everyone who came to the show tonight. We can't do the show without an audience, so we love your support. Thank you for all your support over the years. And Happy St. Patrick's Day. Happy St. Joseph's Day. We'll see you at the next show on May 10th, Radio Days. Thanks for coming.